All right, so I put a tweet out yesterday asking which college football team this season, 2025, is going to suffer the biggest drop-off from last year. And although I didn't specify it in the tweet, I was really talking about regular season record, 12-game regular season. And I got a lot of responses over there. Per normal, some of them are just troll attempts. Some were serious answers. So I'm going to go through some of them and kind of discuss them. You can let me know down below as you're watching which team you think is going to have the biggest drop-off in 2025. Again, I'm talking total wins out of 12. So if I give you an example, somebody commented Florida State. I'm sure I'll get to it in a second when we start going through the replies. Florida State was 2-10 last year. The worst they could do would be 0-12. That would be a 2-game drop-off. There's going to be a lot of teams with more than 2-game drop-off. So I get it that it's still kind of funny to poke Florida State, but Florida State would probably be the answer to the opposite question, which I did a video a week or so ago. Most improved teams of 2025 in terms of regular season record. So again, to use the Florida State example, they were 2-10 last year. If they go 7-5, is that a great year? No, but that would be a 5-game improvement over 2-10 last year. That's a huge improvement year over year. So, Florida State should be at the top of like most people's most improved list, not biggest drop off. But let's go through some of y'all's responses. Again, y'all can let me know what you think about these teams down below. The first response I have here, Tennessee. Now, Tennessee went 10-2 last year in the regular season. And again, that's what we're talking about. I know they made the playoffs and lost and all that, but we're talking about regular season here. So they went 10-2. I do think Tennessee is likely to suffer a setback this season. In other words, I don't think they're going 10-2 or better. So I do think they're dropping off. Are they a team that you would consider maybe having the biggest drop off this season, though? I don't think so. I talked about it in my Tennessee prediction video. We spent a lot of time on this channel over the years laughing at Tennessee in their down years when they were busy winning 4, 5, 6 games a year. I remember when 7-5 was a great year for them. And, while I do think they're probably winning less than 10 games, which would be a drop off, I don't think they're going 4-8 or 5-7 or something. It seems like if Josh Heupel hasn't accomplished anything else at Tennessee, it does seem like he has raised the floor significantly. In other words, 6 or 7 years ago, nobody at all was surprised if Tennessee pooped out a 4 or 5-win season. I would be shocked if Tennessee only won 5 games. I'd be shocked if they didn't make a bowl game. So I feel like the floor is a lot higher than it was. It feels like an 8-4 year to me for Tennessee. So you look at that a couple of different ways. That would be a 2-game drop-off. If I'm off by a game one way or the other, that would be either 9-3 or 7-5. 7-5 would be a pretty significant drop-off, 3 less wins than last season when they went 10-2. But I'm not sure I would list Tennessee as a team that I would expect to be amongst the biggest drop-offs in 2025. Some other answers that we got down here. Somebody says Texas. Texas went 11-1 in the regular season last year. Their only loss was at home to Georgia. They have a similar schedule this year conference-wise. The non-con's a little tougher. They have a trip to Ohio State. Let's assume they lose that one. Let's assume they lose on the road at Georgia. That would be a drop-off. That would be 2 losses, whereas they only had 1 last year. You probably need to find 2 or 3 more losses on Texas' schedule if you're going to consider them a team amongst the biggest drop-offs. They play Texas A&M at the end of the year. That's a home game. They play at Florida. Some people are higher on Florida than they have been in a while. Some people, myself included, feel like they're probably going to be about what they were last year, but they beat a couple of good teams last year, Ole Miss and LSU. They could beat Texas. It's hard to find another loss, I think, beyond that. Ohio State, Texas A&M, Georgia, Florida, maybe. I mean, you're taking a lot of chances there. Texas would have to lose a lot of games where they're favored in order for that to happen. They're about a 3-point underdog on the road at Ohio State. They'll be probably about the same on the road at Georgia, slight underdog. I think they'll be favored on the road at Florida. I think they'll be favored at home against Texas A&M. Even if they split those, that would be 3 losses. That would only be a 2-game drop-off from last year. Would I be shocked if they dropped off some? I guess I wouldn't be shocked if they went 10-2. I think 9-3 would be a little surprising Anything worse than that would be a disaster. I mean, they're ranked number 1 in a lot of people's preseason rankings. They're in the top 2 or 3 in almost every preseason ranking you find. I guess I wouldn't be shocked if they dropped off a game, but I don't think I can consider them for a team that might suffer the biggest drop-off in all of college football. Oregon. This one's interesting. Oregon's got a lot of turnover from last year, and for all the good that Dan Lanning has done at Oregon, he has had a hard time winning a lot of big games. They beat Oregon at home, or Ohio State at home last year in a close game. They did win the Big Ten against Penn State. Those are 2 really good wins. Nothing really in the postseason to write home about, though. If you're Dan Lanning's Oregon team, they lost what they thought would be their best wide receiver this year. He's out for the year with a knee, I think. They've got a new quarterback in Dante Moore, who did play a couple of years ago at UCLA, then transferred into a backup role last season at Oregon, where he sat behind Dylan Gabriel. If you're going to even consider Oregon to be amongst the teams with the biggest drop-offs, first of all, they were 12-0 last year. So I do think it's worth considering them because it's just so hard to go 12-0. I think it's likely they take a step back just because I think it's unlikely in any given year that anybody will go 12-0. Maybe somebody will. Last year, Oregon did. They were the only one. So I think it's likely they take a step back. But if you're going to consider Oregon as the team that possibly takes the biggest step back, then you're banking on Dante Moore not being very good, I think, because they're loaded with NFL talent on both sides of the ball. They lost a lot through draft, graduation, and transfer, like every top team does, but they recruit so well. They're deep. They played multiple guys at a lot of positions last year. So even though people last year weren't technically starters, they played a lot. Now they're the starter this year. They got to play at Penn State. That could be a loss. They don't play Ohio State this year. They play Southern Cal, but I think they get them at home. They play Washington, which I think will be a little bit better than last year, but can they beat Oregon? To be honest with you, I can see a scenario where Oregon goes 9-3. It involves probably Dante Moore stumbling or not being what they want him to be if that were to happen. 3 games, that would be a significant drop-off from last year when they went 12-0. Of course, they would still be a pretty good team at 9-3 and would be one of those bubble playoff teams at the end of the year. But of the teams we've discussed so far, I guess Oregon makes the most sense in terms of potentially having the biggest drop-off. Arizona State was another team that was mentioned. This one's interesting, too. The Big 12 is so compacted at the top. There's 5 or 6 teams in the Big 12 where I'm not going to be surprised if they go 10-2, and I'm not going to be surprised if they go 7-5. It's hard to differentiate. Forget pronouncing players' last names. I can't even pronounce regular English words. So you take Arizona State, right? They won the Big 12 last year at 10-2, I believe, made the playoffs. So they'd have to lose a significant number more games this year in order to be considered with the biggest drop-offs. They would basically have to lose to the majority of those 5 or 6 teams that they play that people consider to be sort of compacted at the top. Kansas State, Iowa State, TCU, Texas Tech, BYU, although the thoughts on BYU are a little lower now than they were maybe a couple of months ago, given what happened with their quarterback situation. But the quarterback is back at Arizona State, which is obviously very important. They do lose Cam Scatterboo, and they're not going to have anybody that's going to give them what he did individually. But as a group, I think they'll run the ball well. Defensively, they were one of the best defenses in the Big 12 last year, and they returned 10 starters on the defensive side of the ball. They were number 1 against the run in the Big 12. I don't know. I like the coach. I like the quarterback. I can see them taking a step back. Clearly, they 10-2. They could go 9-3, 8-4, something like that again, because it's so hard to tell the difference between kind of those top 5 or 6 teams. You could see, in other words, I could see Arizona State and Texas Tech, if they played 10 times, splitting that thing 5-5. Or if they played Iowa State or Kansas State or whatever fill-in-the-blank team you want out of the Big 12. Now, they don't play 5 times, they only play once, and that's what makes it so hard to handicap not just Arizona State, but the whole Big 12 as a whole. it's hard to imagine the quarterback getting worse this year. He was pretty good last year. You would think he'd be maybe a little bit better. They've got 2 wide receivers that are probably going to be drafted in the first 2 rounds of the NFL draft. So even though they lose Scatterbo, and that's what everybody wants to talk about because he was kind of the focal point of the media attention around Arizona State last year, they've got talented offensive players and returned 10 of 11 starters on defense. So while I could see them taking a step back, maybe not making the playoffs or winning the Big 12, I don't know if I see them going much worse than 8-4. Which would be a 2-game drop off. So more along the lines of like a Tennessee that I, maybe or something. I don't know if I can consider them for being amongst the teams with the biggest drop off. Georgia was mentioned a couple of times, and obviously because Georgia's my favorite team, it's hard to tell sometimes when if someone's just trolling or if they really think Georgia is set to potentially have one of the biggest drop offs in college football. When a team recruits in the top 5 every single year, top 3 in Georgia's case every year, over and over and over and over and over again, it becomes really hard to predict them to have a massive drop-off in any one year. And it's not like they had an all-time great regular season last year. They went 10-2. They were borderline to even get into the SEC championship game. There was 3 or 4 teams there in the last couple of weeks of the season that had a chance to get in. Ole Miss, Georgia, Texas, Tennessee, all had chances to get in there at the end, even Texas A&M, and it of course came down to Georgia and Texas, Georgia at 10-2. So to be considered amongst the biggest drop-offs, they would need to win at least 3 games less than that, which would be 7-5. And it's hard to find 5 losses on Georgia's schedule this year, I think. If you think Georgia's going 7-5, they're probably going to have to lose on the road at Tennessee. If that happens, then that erases Tennessee from the biggest drop-off teams. They'd probably have to lose at home to Bama. They would probably have to lose to Cocktail Party to Florida. They would probably have to lose at home to Texas. And then any other game, Auburn, Georgia Tech, on the road at Ole Miss. And while all of those games I named, I think are potential losses for Georgia, I could see maybe they stumble and lose on the road at Tennessee. Of course, you can picture them losing at home to Bama. They always lose to Bama. Maybe they lose to Cocktail Party to Florida. Maybe they lose at home to Texas. Maybe they lose on the road at Ole Miss. Maybe they lose on the road at Auburn. Maybe they lose to Georgia Tech. But are they going to lose 5 of those? I guess it's possible. It would be extremely disappointing if Georgia went 7-5. I think 8-4 is probably the floor for Georgia. 9-3, probably the most likely record. I've got them at 10-2, but I could see a scenario. It would involve Gunnar Stockton not being any good, right? And the offensive line not improving any over last year, which was a huge problem last year. I think their wide receivers are going to be fine, really good actually. Which is a big improvement over last year. But the offensive line, I think, is fair to question. Gunnar Stockton, I think, fair to question just because we haven't seen a lot of him. The defense wasn't great against the run last year. Maybe it doesn't get any better. And I could see a scenario where maybe they go 8-4. Hard for me to see 7-5, but it is feasible, I think, that Georgia, to predict Georgia to have some type of a drop-off maybe. Ole Miss was another one. This is an interesting – Ole Miss is kind of a wild card team to me. Not a lot of people are talking about them this year. Go back to this time last year. Everybody was talking about Ole Miss as a potential playoff team, and it turned out they were right. They got to 9-3, barely missing the playoffs, and had it not been for 2 upset losses, I mean, they were not supposed to lose to Kentucky. Kentucky was terrible. They had 1 SEC win last year, and it was against Lane Kiffin's Ole Miss. They beat Georgia at home. It looked like they were on the way to the playoffs, and then they had that disastrous outing on the road in Gainesville and lost to a pretty bad Florida team, and that knocked them out at 9-3, but they were close last year. Now, flash forward to now, hasn't been a lot of talk about Ole Miss this offseason. They lost their quarterback. They lost a lot of players, actually. I just did a prediction video for Ole Miss yesterday. You can go back and check it out if you want to know more of my thoughts about Ole Miss this season. I do think they take a step back. Now, they may end up with a similar record, though. When you look at their schedule, they do play LSU. That's going to be tough. They play at Georgia. That's going to be tough, but they get Florida at home this time as opposed to on the road last year. They don't have much of a non-con schedule to speak of, really, and then they've got the Egg Bowl at the end of the year. I could see a scenario where Ole Miss isn't as good of a team as they were last year, but they still get to 9-3. Their defensive line, I think, could be an issue this year compared to last year when it was maybe the best in the country. And, of course, a new quarterback there. But I don't know. They went 9-3. To consider them amongst the teams with the biggest drop-off, they'd have to go like 6-6 or worse. And kind of like Tennessee and Josh Heupel, it feels like Lane Kiffin has gotten Ole Miss to the point where they have a higher floor than what they historically have had. In other words, I think almost everybody watching this video right now would be absolutely shocked if Ole Miss won 5 games. And it wasn't that long ago where that was just kind of the expected norm at a place like Ole Miss. So it's hard for me to really put Ole Miss in this category of potential biggest drop-offs for the 2025 season. Another vote for Oregon there. Boise State. Now, this is a hard one to sort of try to figure out here because they are a good team. Are they a great team in Power 4 standards? No. Like, you look at the top 5 or 6 teams, whoever you think that is, Boise State's not beating any of those teams. I think we all understand that. They're a good team. They could beat a lot of Power 4 teams. They could probably beat almost every Power 4 team in the bottom half of each conference. But when you look at their schedule, they don't play a bunch of Power 4 teams, at least not during the regular season. And I do think they're one of the best and will be one of the best Group of 5 teams again in 2025. They play UNLV. That's their toughest competition in conference. They do play Notre Dame. That's a likely loss on the road in South Bend. But even if you think they're going to lose at home to UNLV later in the season, it's really hard to confidently find more than 2 losses for Boise State in the regular season. They lose Ashton Genty, and I think that's what a lot of people are going to focus on, similar to Arizona State losing Cam Scatterbo, but they get back almost everybody else, including the quarterback. So will they be the Group of 5 team that rises to the top and makes the playoffs again? Probably not. And again, I didn't specify when I made this tweet that I was talking just about the regular season. So maybe this person thinks that they'll be a great Group of 5 team but won't make the playoffs. They actually mention here I could see potentially them not being a top 3 Group of 5 team. That is possible. I don't know who y'all think will be sort of the class of the Group of 5 this year. I think it'll be Boise State in the running, Tulane, maybe James Madison if you're looking for a wild card. I like UNLV, UAB, whatever teams you think. So but in terms of regular season record, I don't know if I see them taking a massive drop off in 2025. There's another vote for Oregon on here, another vote for Texas. Someone says SMU. This is a possibility here. SMU, I think, snuck up on a lot of people last season, it being their first year, not just in the ACC, but their first year in the Power 4, their first year playing a Power 4 conference schedule. And we talk about this a lot now because you have to, as these conferences have expanded. There are vastly different schedules for teams within the same conference. And SMU got a pretty favorable draw last season in terms of the conference schedule when you look at the teams they did play and, more importantly, the teams they didn't have to play. This year, it's a little bit more difficult of a schedule for SMU. They get the quarterback back. They lose some other key pieces, heavy in the transfer portal. I do like their coach, Rhett Lashley, even though he's probably letting his mouth get a little bit out in front of him. He's sort of the Big 12 version of Kurt Cignetti a little bit. But I could see a scenario where SMU, who went 11-1 last year, falls to maybe 8-4, and that would be a difference of 3 games. That would at least put them in the running, maybe, for a team with one of the most significant drop-offs. Again, someone says Ohio State. I don't know, man. 10-2 last year. I mean, they're likely to improve. They're more likely to improve that record than to fall off. They do host Texas early in the year, so maybe you're counting on them losing that game. They got Michigan at the end of the year, death, taxes, and getting beat by Michigan, so that would be 2. Where's the other one? They host Penn State. Is this the year Penn State beats Ohio State? Even if they lose all 3 of those games, that's only 1 less win than last year. in the regular season. So I probably have to disagree with Ohio State even being in consideration for one of the teams that could suffer the biggest drop-off. Another vote for Arizona State, another vote for Oregon, another vote for Tennessee there. Missouri was 9-3 last year. I didn't think they were a very good team. In fact, I spent the majority of the second half of last season saying I thought Missouri was the worst top 25 team, and I didn't know why they kept being ranked. It had to just be because of their record, I guess. But you look at the three good teams they played, they lost, and it wasn't particularly close. I mean, they got destroyed by Texas A&M and Alabama. I mean, just destroyed. The games weren't close. I'm talking losing by 30 and 40 points. They have a similar schedule, though, to last season. And they get some pieces back. They've recruited well. I really like the running back. I haven't done a Missouri prediction video yet, so I'm not really that confident one way or the other on them having a drop-off from that 9-3 record or not. But just based on what I do know about them so far, before I sit down to do a prediction video for them, if we're going on 3 games or more being sort of a significant drop-off, that means they would have to go 6-6. And when you look at the Missouri schedule, it's hard to find 6 losses on there. They play a lot of teams in the bottom third of the SEC in terms of preseason perception. So, could they do worse than 9-3 and have some kind of a drop-off? It's possible. Could they be one of the teams with the biggest drop-off? I don't know. Hard to see that. Another vote for Oregon, another vote for Tennessee. Somebody says Georgia because they suck, but his name is Gator Larry, so maybe take that with a grain of salt. Another vote for Arizona State, and they even mentioned losing Cam Scatterbo. We talked about that earlier. SMU again. Let's see, what else do we have on here? A lot of these are just getting to be the same now. There's 1, there's 2. Talked about SMU. Another one for Florida State. Listen, Florida State could go 0-12. That still wouldn't qualify them as the biggest drop-off of 2025 because they were 2-10. I want to be a difference of 2 games. So I think it's a little bit of trolling there. Somebody says South Carolina. This is a possibility. It's harder to be confident in South Carolina being good year over year because they so rarely are. In other words, compared to a team like Georgia, Ohio State, Bama, Oregon, whatever, these teams that are sort of perennial top 10, top 15 type teams, they lose players every year. They lose good players. They might have a little bit of coaching turnover. They might have a more difficult schedule than the year before. But because we're just used to them winning 9+ games in their sleep, those other teams, we sort of unconsciously give teams like that some benefit of the doubt. South Carolina doesn't get that for obvious reasons. Now, I'm pretty high on South Carolina. It feels to me like they're probably going to end up about where they did last year, just outside the playoffs looking in. But they got one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in football in Norris Sellers. But they have a difficult schedule. They play Alabama. They play Oklahoma. They play LSU. They play Missouri on the road, if I'm not mistaken, early in the year. They play Clemson at the end of the year. They went 9-3. Is 6-6 a possibility for South Carolina? That would be shocking to me. Again, like Tennessee and like Ole Miss, it feels like Shane Beamer's South Carolina has raised the floor from what it normally is for that program. Shane Beamer's been there. This is his 5th year. He's exceeded expectations 3 out of. There's only been 1 year that Shane Beamer has been at South Carolina where South Carolina has won less games than they were expected to win. The expected win total number that we talk about a lot here, they're expected to win this amount of games. There's only been 1 year where South Carolina's won less than that under Shane Beamer. So it's hard for me to imagine South Carolina suffering the biggest drop-off in all of college football in 2025 because Shane Beamer has been somewhat successful there. And they've got one of the most dynamic quarterbacks in all the SEC, Lenore Sellers, in a year where a lot of the top teams don't have that, or at least they don't have that returning. Texas, new quarterback. Georgia, new quarterback. Alabama, new quarterback. Tennessee, new quarterback. Just a lot of new quarterbacks around the league. Nussmeier and Sellers are probably the two best returning quarterbacks in the SEC. Now, at the end of the year, we may look back and say Lagway was really good. Arch Manning was really good. Ty Simpson was really good. Gunnar Stockton was really good. Whatever. We may look back. But now heading in based on just of what we've seen so far, Nussmeier and Sellers, two of the best. So I don't know if South Carolina is going to suffer the biggest drop-off of any team in 2025. Could they go 7-5? Absolutely. There's very difficult games there, and there's a 4-game stretch where they play 4 ranked teams in a row. It's very difficult for anybody. Never mind South Carolina. So there is a 7-5 in there somewhere. Hard for me to see less than that. 7-5 would be a 2-game drop-off from last year. Hard for me to see worse than that, though, when it comes to South Carolina. Another vote for Missouri. Vandy, somebody says Vandy going 4-8. What would that be? Were they 6-6 last year? I don't think Vandy's going to be very good this year, but I don't think they were very good last year. I think they got a lot of press because they beat Bama. Outside of that, I don't think they're very good. I mean, Diego Poverty's fun to watch. He's a decent quarterback. I don't think Vandy's winning 7 or 8 games. Are they going to go 4-8 like this person says? I think it's more likely they go 4-8 than it is they go 8-4. But I don't know if they'll suffer the biggest drop off. Missouri again. Tennessee again, Ole Miss again. Here's one for Illinois. Illinois is the Big Ten version of South Carolina, right? They don't recruit great. You don't really think about them that much. But then at the end of the year, you looked up and they were 9-3, 1 game out of the playoffs there in the Big Ten. And of course, Illinois and South Carolina played in the postseason. Illinois came out on top. I don't think Illinois is making the playoffs this year. They're a sort of a popular pick as a dark horse or a sleeper, sort of last year's Indiana, kind of to sort of make a run and get to the playoffs in the Big Ten. I don't see that happening for Illinois. It feels to me like they're going to be about what they were last year, 9-3, maybe 8-4. I have a hard time in my head getting to 10-2 with Illinois, but I don't think they'll take the biggest step back in all of college football in 2025. Another vote for Georgia. Illinois, another vote for Tennessee, another vote for Ole Miss. Now, I've purposely skipped over a couple of teams that were listed a bunch of times because these are the 2 teams I'm going with in 2025 for the potentially to have the biggest drop-off in all of college football. Number 1, Indiana. 11-1 last year under first-year head coach Curt Cignetti, and one of the easiest Power 4 schedules we've seen in a long, long time. The only ranked team they played, I believe, was, they played 2, I guess. They played Michigan and Ohio State. They beat Michigan, lost to Ohio State, and then lost in the first round of the playoffs. When you look at Indiana's schedule this year, much more difficult than last year. Much more difficult. And I'm just not a buyer in them long term. Similar to South Carolina, I need to see success for more than 1 year before I can sort of just blindly expect it to happen year over year. And I'll admit I'm a little bit biased here. I don't like Curt Cignetti. I think he runs his mouth too much. I think he's writing checks that there's no way Indiana's football program can cash. He's made a lot of enemies, not just outside the Big Ten, but even in the Big Ten. There's a lot of Big Ten fans that are tired of hearing from Curt Cignetti. I think he's going to get some comeuppance this year. I think we're going to end up seeing a much more humble version of Curt Cignetti in 2025. They went 11-1 last year. I think they're going to hover around bowl eligibility in 2025, 6 or 7 wins. I think they are definitely in the running for biggest drop-off in 2025. And the second team that was listed several times that I'm also going to throw my hat in the ring for, Colorado. Colorado drastically exceeded expectations last year, no question about it. 9-3 regular season with a Heisman Trophy winner, one of the best quarterbacks they've ever had, and one of the best quarterbacks in college football, and a dynamic receiving group. All of that is gone. They haven't recruited. They really haven't even tried. It's very transfer heavy. They've got a freshman quarterback who may or may not end up being good. They brought in a portal quarterback with experience. Don't know which way they're going to go there, but they don't even try to run the ball. They've got 2 of the worst lines of scrimmage in all of the Power 4. When you look at the Big 12, although there might not be 2 or 3 dominant or elite teams within the Big 12, they're kind of compacted there at the top, like we talked about earlier. They're closer to the bottom than they are to the top. They're more West Virginia than they are Arizona State. I don't think they're getting anywhere close to 9 wins this year. I think, like Indiana, they'll be hovering around bowl eligibility. It's almost a start-over year there after losing Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, a couple of those wide receivers, Shiloh Sanders in the secondary. It feels like a little bit of a start-over year for them. So my 2 picks for the biggest drop-off in 2025 would be Indiana and Colorado. Let me know, is there any teams that we didn't mention in this video that you think could potentially suffer the biggest drop off in 2025? Let me know down below. Appreciate you watching. Have a good morning.